When we picture the disciples, it's easy to imagine them as polished saints, halos glowing, robes flowing, hands perfectly folded in prayer. But the truth, these guys were a mess. They were unpredictable, inconsistent, and often confused, and somehow still the ones that Jesus trusted the most to carry his message forward. Within the 13 men, and yes, I said 13 because they did add someone after Judas. Within those 13 men who followed Jesus closely, we find an eclectic mix of personalities: raw, reactive, uncertain, jealous, inquisitive, a kaleidoscope of ordinary, unpredictable people brought together not because they were perfect, but because Jesus saw purpose in their chaos. And since I am a children and youth pastor and we are entering the season of graduation, and I like a little bit of humor every now and then, I put together a couple superlatives, or most likelies, for our distinguished disciples. So John is most likely to remind you that he is the one that Jesus loved. He wrote an entire gospel without using his own name, but still managed to mention that he beat Peter in a foot race and that he was Jesus' favorite. Philip, most likely to ask the most obvious questions at the worst possible time, like when he interrupted Jesus mid-sermon with, "Just show us the Father and we'll be good," and Jesus sighed and had to start explaining all over again. If anybody wants to do that, just raise your hand though. Matthew, the tax collector, most likely to write everything down in detail. He gave us a gospel with receipts and probably made the first color-coded spreadsheet. Thomas, most likely to become a forensic scientist. He needed proof, and Jesus didn't scold him, he showed him without judgment. Judas Iscariot, most likely to be voted off the island. He had proximity to Jesus, close enough to kiss him on the cheek, but not the heart to actually follow him. See, he shows us that you can be physically near Jesus and still completely miss who he is. And then we get to Peter. Peter is my own personal favorite. He is my favorite character in the Bible. I lovingly call him a bumbling idiot because he has such a reckless heart for following Jesus. So his is most likely to bomb the final exam, but still be named valedictorian. He was bold, brash, and chronically allergic to silence. He walked on water until he remembered that he was in fact not God. He promised Jesus undying loyalty and then denied him 3 times before sunrise. He tried to defend Jesus with a sword and missed. If there was a wrong move to make, Peter made it loudly and proudly. And still, Jesus called him the Rock and handed him the keys to heaven. Jesus looked at him post-denial, post-failure, and offered him breakfast, not blame. In John 21, after the biggest collapse of his life, Jesus looks at Peter and doesn't rebuke him. He restores him. Jesus doesn't leave Peter in that boat. He meets him on the shore, not with a lecture, not with a list, not with a lashing, but with breakfast. Fish and bread, the kind of grace that smells like a charcoal fire, the same kind of fire that Peter was standing near the night that he said that he didn't even know this man. Jesus is recreating the scene, not to shame Peter, but to restore him. And it's right there in the cracks, in the shame, in the messy middle, that Peter becomes something new. Something like the Japanese art of kintsugi, where they repair broken pottery with gold. Peter's story reminds us that our greatest failures don't disqualify us. They become the very places that grace holds us together. And so this is where we find Peter this morning in our scripture. He's not on a mountaintop. He's not in the temple. He's not even preaching. He's back on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. He's back home. He's back to fishing. He's back to something that doesn't require any risk or heart or failure. It's a job that he learned as a kid, so it is muscle memory. Just weeks before, Jesus had been arrested, mocked by the very same crowds that cheered for him only days before. Then he was tortured, he was crucified, and all those times that Peter had begged Jesus to believe him when he said he would never deny knowing him slipped away. Peter made it to the final exam, and he did not exactly rise to the moment. We would say he choked. His faith didn't just falter, it collapsed spectacularly in plain view. This disciple who prided himself time again on being in Jesus' inner circle, who had witnessed firsthand countless miracles and glimpses of heaven on earth through Jesus, is now humiliated, broken, and crushed. When we last saw Peter, he had been in Jerusalem, hiding in locked rooms with the other disciples, still wrestling with the aftermath of Easter Sunday. But now we find Peter, he is 80 miles away along the shores of the Galilee. Peter went home. He's got his tail tucked between his legs, he's licking his wounds, and he goes back to where he's just Simon, a fisherman. Nothing more, nothing less, no fanfare, no questions or expectations. And I get it. When I graduated from college in 2007, I felt unstoppable. College had been the place where I figured out who I was, who I wanted to be. I loved all of it. I had an impenetrable circle of friends who had my back through anything. My parents' credit card to fuel my MCR fandom of going to concerts all the time, and a fire for getting messy for Jesus. Bristol, Tennessee felt more like home than Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, where I grew up. So I made the only logical decision that I could make at 22. I packed everything into my Ford Taurus and moved back at the end of the summer. I was convinced that if I just returned to where it all worked, everything would fall back to place. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Sure, the town was the same. Everything was just as I had left it, but something had shifted. I didn't want to admit it then, but I can now. It was me. I was the shift. I was chasing a version of myself that didn't exist anymore. I was chasing the sheltered 20-something-year-old college kid who had a devil-may-care attitude and a tender heart for adventure, and Jesus who didn't have to worry about rent, student loans, or where my next meal was coming from. What I found when I got there was rejection letters, an underpaying retail job, an attic to sleep in, and a diet of ramen and peanut butter crackers. My friends were either scattered across the country, starting their own lives, or still in the bubble of college life. But me, I was spiraling. I was miserable, lonely, heartbroken, and left wondering how everything fell apart so fast. I was clutching onto that idealized version of life that I had in my head so desperately, even though everything was crashing around me. The fears, darkness, and unsettling feelings that I had ever since graduating didn't go away just because I went back to where it all I thought had made sense. I learned, it turns out, that going back doesn't fix what's broken. Like author Thomas Wolfe so succinctly put it, you can never go home again, because the thing that's broken is usually you. Because no matter where you are or where you go, you are still going to be right there. And that's where Peter is. Back in the boat, back on the water, back to where it all started, and maybe in his mind, back to where it all went wrong. Who hasn't tried to do that before? Tried to go back to the save point, back to a place or feeling or time where we can have a redo, We've all done something similar to this in some way. We go back to what we know, hoping against all hopes that maybe we can forget about what we did. Maybe if we choose a different path for the story, the ending won't be quite so bitter. But Peter's not alone. Peter finds himself in the same boat as many of his fellow disciples. This is an important development since we last saw the disciples gathered together was in Jerusalem when Jesus appeared to them. Something has happened to the group and they are disbanded, they're broken, and they're scattered. The excitement and wonder of the resurrected Jesus has died off, and in its place is a sense of hopelessness, leaving them all disoriented and unsure what comes next. For 3 years, they followed this eclectic, enigmatic, incredible teacher who led them from town to town, teaching and preaching about God. And in a sudden, tragic turn of events, that leader is no longer physically among them. It's like the spiritual GPS lost connection and they couldn't get back on track. So just like Peter, they went back to the only thing that made sense. But even that, as we'll see, doesn't quite work anymore. It fits like an ill-fitting jacket, pinching in the arms, buttons aren't aligning properly. All the pieces are still there, but the edges don't meet up like they once did. And just as the disciples discovered, when we walk with Jesus, even in the messy, even in the imperfect, even in the chaos and crazy, going back to life before knowing Jesus never quite feels the same again. Growing up, our Christmas tree as a family was topped with what most people would call trash. We had a star that was missing a point, and a Dollar Tree angel that was not allowed to be plugged in anymore because she had a tendency of catching on fire. It was crooked, it was cheap, but that star and that angel, they mean everything to me. They told a story of a scrappy beauty, of finding light in unexpected places. They remind me that broken things can still shine. And that is what Kintsugi is about. It's the art of honoring brokenness and not hiding it. Kintsugi takes shattered pottery and puts it back together with lacquer mixed with gold. The cracks aren't covered up, they're highlighted. They're put on display. Each fracture becomes a place of beauty, like a scar that's been turned sacred. The goal isn't to pretend that the piece was never broken. It's to say, yes, it was. And look at it now. It's not less than it was before, it's more. It's more valuable, more unique, more full of story. Kintsugi doesn't erase the damage, it claims it. It transforms it. It says, this break, yeah, it happens, but we're not ashamed of it. The cracks don't ruin the vessel, they reveal its resilience. A Kintsugi artist doesn't try to make it perfect. They make it beautiful because it's broken. And that's exactly what Jesus is about to do with Peter. He's about to reclaim, restore, and recommission Peter for something far greater than the broken man could ever fathom. He's banged up by his own choices. He's humbled by his own failures. He's hiding from a God he denied knowing without realizing that he's always been uniquely known all along. I think Jesus saw him like I see my family's four-pointed star and our creepy angel. Not as trash, but as treasure, as beloved, as worthy of gold in the cracks. Peter's mistakes, his denials, his failures, all those became part of his story. It's because of the cracks that there is value, there is testimony, there is grace. And just like a Kintsugi artist, Jesus gathered Peter's pieces, he dusted them off, and they made him a new creation. And it's here on that quiet shore with the scent of charcoal in the air and breakfast waiting that Jesus begins filling in those cracks. He doesn't drag Peter through his failures. He doesn't demand an apology or some test of loyalty. There's no guilt trip, no public shaming, just one simple question, asked 3 times, like a quiet, holy dance of grace. Peter, do you love me? In the original Greek manuscripts, there's a wordplay that the English translation lacks. The ancient Greek language has different words for the word love. There's approximately 7, 8, depending on who you talk to the one English word, love. Each of their words has a unique twist or nuance in meaning or emphasis. The first time Jesus says, Peter, do you agapos me? Is your love for me agape? Is it full-bodied, sacrificial, unconditional, a kind of love that demands? Is it a love that would sacrifice without explanation or expectation? A love that stays even when it's hard? A love that gives without keeping score? A love that forgives, that serves, that lays itself down? The kind of love that sticks through betrayal and pain. The kind of love I showed you when I washed your feet. The kind of love I carried to the cross. Is your love for me unflinching even when it costs everything? Do you love me like that, Peter? And Peter replies, Lord, you know I philo you. Not agape, phila. Does anybody know phila? Hopefully. It's the love of brothers, Philadelphia, of friends, a love that is warm and real but safe. Peter's starting to get it now. He knows what agape costs. He remembers swearing he'd never leave Jesus and then doing exactly that. So now when Jesus asks for agape, Peter gives the word that he thinks he can stand behind, phila. Yes, Jesus, I love you like a brother, not in the same sacrificial way as agape. Don't you remember? I literally just denied even knowing you just weeks ago. I've jumped out of a boat to get to you. I've given up my job, my finances to be with you, but when it all came to a head, I couldn't do it. Peter isn't saying he doesn't love Jesus, but he's holding all of the broken pieces of his failures and his shame. Peter is calling his love phila by saying, Lord, I love you. There's so many things I would do for you, but I'm not willing to put everything on the line. So I am a product of the 90s. I was born in 85, and one of my favorite bands was Spice Girls. And in the 1998 cinematographic, wow, I gave myself a big word to say, cinematographic masterpiece, Spice World, the band is traveling around a European countryside in a tour bus and is driven by Michael Lee Addy, who you might know better known by his stage name of Meatloaf. There is a scene that stands out to me, and when I was researching and writing my sermon, I cracked up laughing in my office when I thought of this. All the toilets on the bus have broken down, and Clifford, the band's manager, asks Meatloaf's Dennis, who's driving the bus, to fix them himself. And Dennis replies, I love these girls, and I would do anything for them, but I won't do that. A play on Meatloaf's iconic song, I Would Do Anything for Love. Peter is saying to Jesus, I will jump out of a boat for you, leave my family behind, fight a Roman soldier, but I will not go that final step to agape love. So Jesus asks him again, Peter, do you agape me? Jesus is patient. He's still reaching out to Peter, still inviting him. He is digging into that ash heap of regret and failure, pulling out those broken pieces of Peter's heart and setting them back in place. Jesus is tracing those jagged, painful edges with gold. Peter's deepest shame and failures are becoming his story, because grace doesn't just clean up the mess and hide it away. Now, don't get me wrong, Peter is not saying he doesn't love Jesus, but he's holding all of those broken pieces, and he is clutching onto them. I tend to picture Peter standing there almost like a child, clutching in one hand the broken vase, and in the other, the offending baseball. He is sitting in his ash heap. He is gathering all the broken pieces and finding an empty and false kind of safety in that wreckage. By Peter again calling his love philo, he is clinging to the guilt almost like a security blanket. Yes, Jesus, I love you, but you don't want me. You want someone better, someone who can love you fully. So Jesus asked Peter a third time, Peter, do you philo me? Ah, this time Jesus flips the script and meets Peter where he is, not where he should be. It's as if he's saying to Peter, I see you. I see your heart. I see your pain. And even though right now you don't feel it, I am yours and you are mine. And someday you will be able to say agape. Let go of your guilt and shame. This subtle yet humbling change is what breaks into Peter's heart, because it's in this moment where Peter finally realizes what Jesus is doing. And it's the same thing God has been doing all along. A young boy's humble lunch of bread and fish, a widow's last drops of oil, a sling and 5 stones in the hand of a young shepherd boy. All throughout Scripture, we see God taking something small, broken, insignificant, and making it more than enough. Jesus is meeting Peter in the distance between agape and philia. Jesus is reaching into the wreckage and saying, I'm not asking for the version of you that stood so confidently and swore you to die by my side. I'm not asking for the reckless display of love that you had when you scrambled out of a boat with shaky feet trying to get to me. I'm asking for you here. The you who shudders at the sounds of roosters crowing. The you who knows what it feels like to fail. I don't want or need your feeble attempt at perfection. I just want you. And by meeting Peter in that raw, honest space, Jesus recommissions Peter. He has reclaimed him, he has restored him, and now he is sending him out to feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep. Jesus doesn't need Peter to prove himself. He needs Peter to love, with the kind of love that feeds, tends, and shows up in the mess of other people's lives. In the 1912 World Series, New York Giants player Fred Snodgrass would drop an easy fly ball that would end up costing the Giants the game and ultimately the series. That moment has become so legendary that it still is known today as Snodgrass' muff. Despite the fact that Fred would go on to become a successful banker, city councilman, and mayor of Oxnard, California, his obituary in 1974 would go on to read, "Ball player muffed 1912 fly." One missed catch would overshadow a lifetime of service. If Fred Snodgrass' life can be boiled down to one quip about a missed baseball, imagine what Peter's would sound like. He swore he never knew him. That sounds like a fair and fitting statement to sum up Peter. Let's forget everything else Peter did and focus in on this one ultimate act of failure and betrayal. If Peter's story ended here, it would be sensical, clean, fair, just. But grace isn't fair. And that's where the paradoxical beauty of what Jesus is doing and offering to Peter begins. Because grace takes what's fair and turns it inside out. Fair would have etched Peter's name in stone. Fair would have left Peter shattered on the floor. But grace says, you're still mine. You're still called. I will always choose you. Because that's what grace does. It doesn't repair, it redeems. It takes the scars and the cracks and turns them into sacred. Jesus takes the places of Peter's deepest shame and transforms them into the vessel of his deepest restoration. Had Jesus met Peter with condemnation and retribution, then the church, us here today, would have been built on the foundation of judgment rather than upon the foundation of God's grace. And that's the beauty in grace. It makes life and all of our messes not fair. And this is where we come back to Kintsugi. The cracks are not hidden, they are gilded, revealing the beauty of having been pieced back together. Peter isn't qualified in spite of the cracks, he's qualified because of them. As Reverend Nadia Bolz-Weber says, those most qualified to speak the gospel are those who truly know how unqualified they are to speak the gospel. But think of it this way. The resurrected Jesus didn't come back flawless. He came back scarred. He stood before the disciples, holding out hands still marked by the nails, Jesus didn't erase the evidence of the crucifixion, he showed it. The proof of resurrection was not perfection, it was the presence of scars. So Peter's mistakes, the denials, the failures, all became a part of the story. And not just his story, but the story of the church. Jesus picked up the broken pieces of Peter's life. He didn't discard them. He didn't try to glue them together and hope that nobody would notice. He honored them. He filled them with grace. He turned a scar into sacred, a foundation not built on perfection, but on grace-filled cracks. Because, friends, the story of God has never been built on the polished or the pristine. It's been built on the reclaimed. The church was never meant to be a museum for the flawless. If it was, I wouldn't be here. It's a home for the flawed, the healed, the healing, the still figuring it out. Look at the foundation of this. A temperamental fisherman with a foot-shaped mouth who was handed the keys of the church. A doubter who needed to touch the wounds to believe. A woman once dismissed as sinful, chosen to be the first to preach resurrection. It's built on a man who ran from Nineveh, a king who abused his power and committed murder, a persecutor of Christians. Jesus didn't ask Peter to prove himself, he asked him to love, not with the polished certainty of a man who has it all together, but with the humbled, trembling honesty of a man who's been wrecked and remade by grace. That's who God builds with. The church is built on grace-mended cracks of imperfection, inconsistent, yet fully known and fully loved. Humans who didn't get it right, but still got back up. People who didn't always believe perfectly, but kept following anyway. So, my friends, let your life carry the evidence. Not that you've never bled, but that when you did, grace found you. Jesus met you in the mess, and he didn't flinch. He knelt beside you in the rubble, touched the cracks, and said, This is where the gold goes. Amen.